Joining us on the line is Rob Blackie. Rob is seeking the Liberal Democrat candidacy to be the Mayor of London in 2020. Rob, first things first, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, Rob, let's get stuck into your kind of relationship with the Lib Dems. This is not the first time you've run, because of course you're running as a GLA member as well, Assembly member. You ran in 2016. What did you learn from that experience?
I've learned that really we need to focus on the things that matter to people. And people obviously I do a lot of knocking on people's doors. So I hear from people face to face a lot of what matters to them in London at the moment. And I think if you focus on that, you can only be successful.
And it's quite a tough list as well. Of course, on there is Siobhan Benita, the former independent candidate. Do you think it's good that you have strong competition?
It's always good for a political party when it has lots of talent in it and lots of people competing for the top jobs. It makes all of us better. And whoever wins is better because they have stiff competition.
And when you speak to the other Liberal Democrats on a level, in terms of progress, they often refer to, of course, the gains in Twickenham and Kingston in London at the 2017 election, of course, on a local council level as well, gaining seats. But, Rob, I know it's very early to say, and I did ask this to a few other Lib Dem politicians that we've spoken to, but what is a realistic achievement for the Lib Dems when it comes to the 2020 London mayor election?
In a normal year, it would be easy to give an answer to that because a realistic achievement would be slightly better than you're doing at the moment. But at the moment, I've never seen British politics like the way it is. We've got the two main party leaders, deeply disliked by most of the public, pushing through the biggest change in our country, Brexit, that's happened in 70 years. The public aren't happy with the way that's going. It may well get worse. And both of the main parties may well manage to split in two before the 2020 elections. So, if I was being modest with my outcome, I'd say we should do quite a lot better than we did last time, where we got sort of 5% or so of the vote. But really, there's no way to tell. We could win the mayoralty next time round, depending on what happens more broadly in British politics.
Now, of course, the Liberal Democrats as well as the Greens are kind of strong on this people's vote in terms of a second referendum when it comes to the first decision we made to leave Europe. I know people won't describe it as a second referendum. They'll say it's a first referendum on the deal. But leaving that kind of technicality aside, of course, whilst London is heavily leaning towards Remain, there are a lot of Leave voters in London. Are the Liberal Democrats going to ignore them? How are you going to reach out to people who voted Leave and who still think we should leave the European Union?
I think the first thing is to treat people with respect. People voted for good reasons. I didn't agree with their reasons, but people voted for reasons. And often I find if you just listen to people, that's a really good start to the conversation. And one of the things we've discovered is that particularly in sort of younger and middle-aged voters, really anyone sort of below retirement age, they have started to move towards supporting staying in the EU quite fast. Why is that? Well, it's because they can see the threat to their jobs more than anything. That's the thing that everyone in London can see. It's not just the city. Almost everyone in London is directly or indirectly linked to the global economy. And Brexit is a big threat to everyone in London.
Do you think the Lib Dems can cut it with people who voted for Brexit then?
Yes, certainly we do have even a decent proportion of people who vote Lib Dem did vote for Brexit. It's not very high. Most of our voters are people who voted Remain. Some people vote for Lib Dems because they don't think Brexit is actually particularly important. But actually, a lot of them are people who've changed their minds since voting that way, or have come to a conclusion that maybe they haven't changed their minds yet, but they're on their way to changing their minds. And the interesting thing you find in the moment at Britain is just over half of people now want to stay in the European Union, but 3/4 of people think that Brexit is going badly. So there's a large chunk of people ready to change their minds at the moment, who I think we're on the verge of persuading.
Looking ahead to the other parties involved in the 2020 London mayor election, of course, Sadiq Khan, you would expect to be the Labour candidate, bearing in mind he's mayor at the moment. How do you assess how he's done as mayor of London?
Well, I don't like to always attack my opponents on everything, but I think really it's been a particular letdown on two issues, or actually three issues really. Transport, where tube delays and train delays have got worse, where actually Transport for London is in a financial crisis at the moment, which means that it's getting harder to pay for good quality services and for maintenance so that it doesn't keep on breaking down. On air pollution, really, some bits of the centre of London now have air quality that's the same as India, and that is really appallingly bad. And Sadiq Khan really hasn't taken that seriously enough. And then thirdly, on crime, there really has been an increase in crime recently. It's not entirely within Sadiq Khan's control, but obviously one part of that has been falling police numbers. And what that means is that it used to be you had a lot more police just walking around our streets, getting to know people in their neighbourhoods. And it turns out when that happens, those policemen go and talk to people on street corners, or shopkeepers, just ordinary people they see on the street, and they pick up a lot of intelligence about what's going on. And often that intelligence allows them to deter crimes from happening in the first place, but also to solve crimes and to catch criminals before they repeat crimes. And I think that increase in crime has been worrying people quite a lot in London. So I think Sadiq Khan, he hasn't been a complete disaster, but those are three very big areas where he really hasn't done enough.
Now, as I said, you're on the Liberal Democrat shortlist to be Mayor of London. You've announced it's been quite an early process when you consider the elections aren't until 2020. You look at the Conservatives as well, and they've obviously finalised their candidate. It's Sean Bailey. Since he has got that nomination, there's been firstly two sides to it. There's been a lot of comments that I think a lot of people didn't know he'd made regarding everything from multiculturalism to whatnot, and a lot of he's come under criticism for a lot of those comments. But also there was a story in the Evening Standard saying that he's been heavily attacked by trolls on the left who have kind of attacked him for some of the things he's done, and he's being hounded. I mean, what do you think of him as a candidate? Do you think he stands any chance of beating Sadiq Khan? Do you think he's an unknown when it comes to London politics?
Well, firstly, attacking people for the colour of their skin is completely unacceptable. And there is a small part of the hard left in Britain who believes that people, ethnic minorities, should only ever vote for the Labour Party. And that is obviously a ridiculous idea. But those people have that very strange view. More broadly on him as a candidate, the strange thing is I read his comments, and he says things like, teenagers are using abortion as contraception, and if you give teenagers condoms, it encourages them to have sex. Those sorts of comments, the sorts of things we used to hear from Conservative politicians when I was a child back in the 1980s and 1970s. So weirdly, he talks like a very, very traditional Conservative politician. And the fascinating thing for me has been he hasn't withdrawn any of those comments at all. He's actually stood by those comments. And I think that puts him very far out of touch with modern London. Do
you think he has any chance of beating Sadiq Khan?
I would think it's very unlikely. I mean, Sadiq Khan's popularity is falling, but I think it's much more likely a Liberal Democrat would beat Sadiq Khan than Sean Bailey.
And right at the start, Rob, you said, obviously, this election isn't kind of like any election we've had before in London. As you said, Brexit is playing a major part of it. I mean, as we see, the Lib Dems were the fourth largest party in terms of the mayor vote when it comes to the 2016 election. So it hasn't been great for the Lib Dems. But surely this, as you say, with a candidate like Sean Bailey, who's attracted such criticism, this is your best ever chance of really establishing a Lib Dem stronghold in London, surely.
Absolutely, and we've seen that at the local elections this year, where the Lib Dems have made gains all across London. We've seen the council by-elections that happen every week. We've had the best opinion polls in London that we've had for 10 years recently, putting us on 15%, which is triple what we got in 2016. So it's not very often you do 3 times as well in 2 years. So I think it is a great opportunity, and it's a great opportunity for a good reason. And that fundamental reason is that London is a liberal city. And that means that our values and the voters' values are very closely in touch with each other. We are aspirational, the way people in London are, and we want people just to be able to get on in life. And I think the other two parties are starting to look increasingly old-fashioned.
Now, Rob, obviously I've spoken to you about Brexit so far, Labour, Conservatives. Now I want to talk about you and your policies for London. Why do you think now is the right time for you to run as the Mayor of London? What kind of policies do you want to see implemented in London? What are the kind of big selling points for Rob Blackie?
So 3 things, really. The first one of which is stopping Brexit. Brexit affects everything else that happens in London. And if we don't manage to stop it, we've got to at least reduce the damage done by Brexit. Just to give 2 simple examples. Kingston Hospital, 1 in 5 people working there from an EU background. So if any significant number of those people leave and go back to their home countries, then that hospital is going to be in some trouble. Similarly, our transport system in London, a lot of the EU nationals working in London use it. And our transport system in London, for one of the reasons it's in trouble at the moment, is that we've got falling passenger numbers, and that seems to be because of Brexit. So Brexit's incredibly important because it affects everything. And it's a moral issue about treating our friends and neighbours from the EU as well as a practical issue. Second big thing really is making sure we get good public transport in London. And I think a lot of mayoral candidates and people like that often talk about the really big projects they're going to build. And we're in favour of big infrastructure projects. But actually, I think more than anything, people day to day want public transport that works reliably. If you're on a train coming into suburban London, having a long delay that was unexpected and missing your kid's bedtime is incredibly annoying and very stressful for people often. So I think focusing on getting our public transport to work effectively, make sure it has the money to do it, cutting congestion, making sure our buses and trains are working well. And then the third thing is tackling air pollution. At the moment, we have thousands of people in London every year dying because of air pollution. And we need to do all the things that are necessary to reduce that. That means phasing out our older polluting buses faster, making sure cabs, black cabs particularly, switch to cleaner technologies faster. And also doing things that will make our environment in towns nicer, like pedestrianising Oxford Street. And I think all of those would make London an even better city to live in. It is the best city in the world to live in, but it could be even better.
Brilliant. And Rob, of course, people can follow you on Twitter at Rob Blackie, and Rob for London is your website if people want to get involved. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Brilliant. Well, Rob Blackie, thank you very much for speaking to Kingston Green Radio.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for having me on.